Hey everyone, can you all hear me? I'll take that as a yes. Excellent.
Hi everyone. I think Saul had an issue with his link. He just left. But he's coming back. I can see him now.
Sorry about that, everyone. A little bit of technical difficulties. I was at this really nice rock outside, and so I thought actually, so that folks wouldn't get tired of yet more plants and books set up in a certain type of way, it'd be more fun if we had a little real live outdoor background here. So pleasure to see everyone. Really excited to be on this panel today. Very glad to be working together with YCL once again. The folks at Youth Climate Leaders really have a special knack for bringing together people across ages, across regions, across scales of government and climate action. And so I'm really excited to be here. I think the way that we're going to start today is actually we're going to have each panelist give a really quick one-sentence introduction about themselves so that we can hear it from their own mouths. And then we're going to go around, have some introductory comments from each person. And then from there, we'll get into a broader discussion and take questions, etc. So my name is Saul Levin. I am a fellow at Data for Progress, and I am senior climate advisor to Congresswoman Deb Haaland from New Mexico in the United States. And I am not speaking on behalf of either Data for Progress or the Congresswoman today, but absolutely pleased to be here. And next, I'll invite Joaquim Levy to provide a very brief introduction of himself.
Hi, I'm Joaquim Levy. I'm from Brazil. I'm in Brazil, and I've been working a range of activities now at the banking sector, financial sector, and we are ever more committed to find new ways to work in a sustainable way. And when you look around, particularly in Brazil, there are so many opportunities that we cannot miss them. And we want to talk about that.
Fantastic. Sara, can you go next?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Sara Nyberg. I'm in Stockholm in Sweden, and I work at the company South Pole with greenhouse gas accounting, so calculating carbon emissions from different companies. And apart from that, I'm very active in the climate and energy movement and organizations, like since 10 years. And that was me in almost a sentence, at least.
Fantastic. Maybe next we could have Ilan.
Hi, Saul. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here with you. So my name is Ilan Cuperstein. I'm Deputy Regional Director for Latin America in C40 Cities, which is a network of 97 megacities in the world committed to tackling climate change. And I work with the 12 cities that are members in the region, and I look forward to this discussion.
Fantastic. Let's see, Helena.
Hello. It's also a pleasure for me to join you today. I'm a biologist. I'm a professor of ecology at the University of Coimbra in Portugal. And I'm also a member of the Mission Board for Climate Change Adaptation, including societal transformation of the European Commission. And I guess that's the reason why I'm here.
Fantastic. Excellent. So, did we cover everybody? I'm looking at the notes here. Take that as a yes. Fantastic. So, why don't we go down and let's just open the conversation. What we want to talk about here today is the Green New Deal or climate strategies related to public investment and how in the different contexts that we look in, and maybe we'll try and give each person 5 minutes to open the conversation. What are you seeing as the sort of key next steps at this moment in climate politics? And I'm hoping that each of the panelists can talk specifically to the scale that you work at, number one, whether it's cities, the federal government, state and provincial governments, and number two, the country and cultural context that you work in. As we know, even though in Europe they call something a Green New Deal, and in the United States they call something a Green New Deal, when you start to look into the details, there's a bit of daylight between them. So, Helena, if you don't mind starting and kind of kicking us off and telling us what you're thinking about right now.
No, thank you. Well, you are right. I mean, we are living times where everybody's talking about the Green Deal and new green policies and new green economy, and the fact is that probably we are all lost in the middle of all these discussions. And but the fact is that the European Union is really leading a process of transformation, and I think that Europeans may and I would say that most of the countries are committed to this process of transition, what we call the EU Green Deal. And in my opinion, the EU Green Deal actually traces a pathway to climate change neutrality and sustainable development. And basically, our European Green Deal is a package of legislation measures. Among others, we have the new climate law, the biodiversity strategy, and a number of laws that are, they may really help to transform the global policy, let's say, in response to climate change. In my opinion, the Europeans, the perception of the Europeans is that we do have a chance to change and to promote change. And more this perception is somehow contaminating the political environment, and they tend to be obliged to really to perform differently. And these, some of the European policies that are part of this package are very are really strong. I mean, if we manage to achieve targets like the climate target that we have now for 55% of carbon emissions by 2030, not anymore 40%. Now the new target is 55%, which is really huge if we think on what we have achieved along the year in terms of, even with the lockdown, we didn't manage to go really very far, and we realized that this crisis is a global crisis. So when we think that if we are not all committed to the same targets, how can we achieve really these targets? But somehow this target of 50% for carbon emissions by 2030 is really promoting a systemic change that can make a difference, because together, I mean, to achieve these targets, the European Union is really promoting the investment in, for example, in renewable energies. And when the investment in renewable energies is as strong as it is becoming in terms of mobility, electrical mobility, new sources of energy for, like, for example, the investment of in wind, offshore, solar energy. These are a number of programs that all connected can really start to change the whole system. This is one of the packages, one of them, with this having in mind this target of 55% for carbon emissions. But together with as part of this change, we have a very strong program on what we call from farm to fork, and this is connected to the food system. And the whole purpose is to change the food system and having a diet that is a planetary diet, not anymore a diet that is separated from the planet. So this whole narrative of one planet, one health is really under is supporting these new programs. So we have the investment and the public investment is really huge. I don't know if it is enough or if we will manage to accomplish the targets, but the fact is that we have very strong policies supported by a very strong public investment package of and 1/3 of it is for climate change initiatives. So it's this is a part of the process. And then besides, there's a big, I believe it's a fantastic work in terms of engaging citizens and then communities in all the process. And having in mind the also transition that should be fair and just. I mean, so the idea is that we have all this public investment in order to support the transition, but at the same time we realize that we are not all prepared to go for it. I mean, we have a lot of citizens that don't have the necessary literacy or the necessary means or tools to change together at the same time. So this has to be supported also in a package that is really helping everybody to change and to go with this transition. And this is very much one of the concerns of the European policy that I think is extremely relevant. Of course, we can say, okay, but is this change enough if we have it at the regional level, if we don't manage to have the all together in the same change? I think, well, I would prefer to have everybody together in the boat, but sometimes in policies, we have just to start and try to contaminate as much as we can. And actually this forum is one of the initiatives that really can help us to feel that we are in the good path, because you have youth involved and working for the same for the same process and the same targets. And so I think that what the European Union is doing is really very positive. Might be that some policies are not strong enough, or we don't have the support that we should have. One of the policies that probably is not enough is the agriculture policy, or we should skip as more as we can and as fast as we can many of the subsidies that are harmful for agriculture, for the environment, for the forests. So these are part of the policies that we're really trying to put in shape, and I believe they are part of a process that is going to happen and should happen as fast as possible, because the targets are really hard to achieve, and the planet is suffering a very big crisis. And connected with this crisis is the crisis of biodiversity, and we also have a very powerful strategy for biodiversity in Europe. We call the Biodiversity Strategy 2030, and with a number of targets, among them planting 3 billion trees, or restoration of 25% of our rivers, or stopping the extinction of species by 2030, 20% of species by 2030. So we have a number of targets connected with this biodiversity strategy that, and it has to be that way. I mean, we have to combine all these programs in order to really to respond to the climate change crisis and generally to the environmental crisis that the world is facing. And so I think this is the start. It's not that we've managed, I don't know if we'll manage to achieve it, but it's very important to have leadership and a continent that is really committed to get this Green Deal done and having his way. So that's I'm sorry, maybe I talked too much.
No, that's okay. This is
okay.
Perfect. Well, it's a great segue, and I'd like to turn now to Mr. Joaquim Levy to talk about what Helena is saying about public investment and sort of the European context is really interesting. And as someone who's worked on investment and finance, as I understand it, across multiple party contexts in Brazil, somehow you're popular with a lot of different folks. And I'm curious how you see climate solutions relating to public investment. Is that necessary? Do you see it as needing to be offset? I think most people would say it is necessary, but where do you invest first, or how do you do it in a fiscally smart way? So I'd love to hear what you're thinking.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that public investment will be very important, and the more coordination you have, the more things happen together, the better. Not only inside a country, but also across countries. Just last week for the G20, the IMF has put together a study that will show that you could almost double the effectiveness in terms of growth if we had everybody doing things at the same time. I think the example of the EU, of course, is very good because it gives a common vision. It gives actually a very good, say, north also for the private sector. Public sector and private sector are complementary, and often public sector is part of a broader, say, public policy that's very important. In Brazil and several other countries in emerging markets, in particular, because the government is not that strong, doesn't have that much money, and the money it has to spend in schools, has spent sometimes even to pay, say, pensions, like in the case of Brazil. To be able to harness all the power of the private sector is very important. Now, with the pandemics, a lot of things will change. The way we work, the way we basically live our life will in many ways change because not because we have changed that much, not that anybody has become an angel, but just because the technology was accelerated quite dramatically. So first, it would be important for governments to think about it and ensure that the transition doesn't leave that many people left behind. And also what that means. It makes life more complicated, for instance, for cities, because all of a sudden you don't know really if you'll be able to, say, increase density and the use of public transportation, how you adapt that to the new reality and the scares of people, even with vaccine and so on. So it's a range of questions there where public participation and guidance will be very important. There is another thing that is fundamental when you think, for instance, in a world of net zero emissions, which is how you address energy. Energy is behind most of the things that we do. I think energy, well, food is also a form of energy, is energy for ourselves, but also energy is what brings light, healthcare, so many other things. So we have to think about how we work regarding that. Now, the big challenge there is how to move away from fossil fuels. In many countries, we still have a huge reliance on fossil fuels. Europe is taking very important steps. And I think the example of Brazil is pretty nice in this aspect because we are a large country. We have a number of natural sources of energy that are not fossil based. So thanks to, say, hydropower, biofuel, more recently, wind as well as solar power. For instance, our industry is 60% of the energy that it uses comes from renewable sources. Our transportation, also a large part, I would say about a third, comes from, say, renewable sources, particularly biofuel. And there is so much to be done, not only in terms of, say, expanding solar and wind, which in Brazil actually are the cheapest sources of energy, but also how we can, for instance, link that to new ways of transport energy like hydrogen, which is something the EU is doing. So there's a possibility of creating a global market for hydrogen, green hydrogen from basically from solar energy. And this can create a new, very meaningful source of income for many countries, including Brazil. There are other ways also where through, say, trade of carbon certificates and things like this, you can really give a boost to existing or new technologies. I take another example. One of the largest sources of carbon emissions in the world is the production of steel. And it's one very complicated to address because it's not only the energy that you're talking, but also to transform iron ore into iron and then into steel, you basically you take the carbon out of the oxygen out of the ore. So the ore is iron plus oxygen. You have to take this oxygen out, and the way to do that is usually with a fossil fuel in a very high temperature, and they just produce CO2. You take the O from the iron ore, you take the C from the carbon from the coal, and here you go. You get iron, but then you also get a lot of CO2. Now in Brazil, you can say compensate that by, instead of using mineral coal, using charcoal from planted forests. So you can literally plant millions of hectares, and this has already been done, but can be scaled up so that we can address that until you get other technologies using what is ultimately a nature-based solution. You get this reduction using charcoal from planted trees. And with these, you also can give new destination to a lot of land that today is degraded land. Now, what will be important to foster that? And where a global Green Deal can be helpful? Well, if say the steel that's produced this way is recognized as a clean steel and is the carbon say savings that is attached to it because of this different technology, this is in a way compensated or can generate something that it can be traded internationally. Well, you help to change the relative price of a clean zero carbon steel from a traditional steel. And by doing that, you create a lot of jobs. You also create, like I told you, millions of hectares of a forest, okay? And like this, there are many alternatives. The same thing with biofuels. And in Brazil, we already have an incipient market of certificates. If this market can be linked to some international market, say for instance, the Quebec, California market, and you can use the carbon that is not emitted in Brazil because a car is running on ethanol, clean ethanol, instead of running on the fossil fuel. From a global perspective, you are achieving the goals of reducing emissions. At the same time, you have a meaningful, say, global cooperation and also transfer of income to other places. I'm taking the example of Brazil, but this could work to with many other countries. So like I was saying, there's a huge, say, opportunities. I believe there will be changes in the urban organization, but also opportunities in making the use of energy more sustainable and creating new income flows. For instance, if you get green hydrogen from Africa, this could be a very meaningful source of income for countries in Morocco, in West Africa, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to think really with a lot of imagination. And all of the things are things that are large scale. So that you make a difference in reducing global emissions in a substantial way, at the same time that can transform global economy, really helping poorer countries to move ahead on a sustainable way.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I think we're starting to get a sense of, the geopolitics of how some of these things are going to travel between the Green New Deals in different places. And so why don't we thank you, Joaquim, and why don't we turn to Sara Nyberg now, who is going to, tell us about her work there, but also hopefully we can get a little bit of insight into how the Arctic and the poles fit into this as well. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I can start maybe, I'm more work related to the European Green Deal, actually, from my organization, Push Sweden, where I'm active. So like the company I'm working at, South Pole, is also following the process of the European Green Deal. It's developing its like standpoint on that. Right now I'll focus on like our work in Push Sweden. So it's a youth network and organization in Sweden within sustainability and climate, and it's existed for maybe 6 or 7 years. And like on a national level, we have different working groups, and we try to work on like advocacy to influence, like to have an actual influence and to be involved in decision making, and to try to contact politicians and so on. And also, like, I've been mostly involved on the international level of Push Sweden. So the last 3 years I've been in the international group of Push, and have been at the UN.
I think we're losing you here for a minute, Sara. Excellent. Well, we're going to go to Ilan and see if we can sort out Sara's, our technical disconnect there, and we'll get her back on. So Ilan, why don't we turn over? As I understand it, you'll have some insights at a more local scale, as well as how that relates to regionally. So looking forward to hearing what you're thinking about.
Hi, Saul. Yes. So working with cities has brought us to some realizations quite early on this year. As you probably imagine, our organization is focused on climate action, but we quickly realized that the mayors of the mega cities, but also the smaller cities in the world, they really needed to tackle the short-term impacts of the pandemic and really ensure the safe recovery of economic activity in our cities. And that is why just a few months into the pandemic, C40 created a global mayoral task force for green and just recovery. So this was basically mayors from around the world, from all of the C40 regions, getting together to discuss what should guide the green and just recovery agenda. Because it is perhaps important to note that both crises, the climate crisis and the COVID-19 crisis that we're currently living, have a very strong urban dimension. So if you look at the data, both for climate, so cities are responsible for about 70% of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. And if you also look at the pandemic, the most affected regions are mega cities in various regions, but the urban dimension of both crises has to be stressed, because this is also key for any kind of green, just, sustainable recovery from the crisis. So what we've done for the past few months was really gather the technical teams from these mayors and also the C40 teams to look at what principles, what key areas, and also some of the impacts of what a green and just recovery would look like for our cities. Bearing in mind that, as I think we're hearing from different actors and different groups just in this call, cities won't do it alone. They need support from multilateral organizations, from national governments, from state and provincial governments, but they also have to be in this conversation, because this is a key urban problem or challenge. So the first kind of document that we launched established quite a few examples from cities that were already taking early action that was both compatible with the pandemic and the climate crisis, because we have to look at this very horrendous from a human point of view, from an economic point of view, but it gives us an opportunity to not return to things or to business as usual. So we need to go back and to build back in another way. What does this look like? So just to mention a few of the principles that these mayors came up, and then over 40 mayors signed or committed to this green and just recovery. So one is, it shouldn't be a return to business as usual, because business as usual, as we know, was taking us to over 3 degrees warming by the end of the century. The recovery should be guided by public health and scientific expertise. Unfortunately, we've seen the pandemic as the climate crisis being politicized by different groups and in different contexts. We should really try to solidify a consensus around the scientific expertise that should guide us. It should address issues of equity. So we know both crises, again, the climate crisis and the pandemic, we will not find a sustainable recovery plan without looking at equity, which means having in mind different groups within society. So especially focusing on the most vulnerable groups, having lenses of gender, race, age, minority groups that have to be included in any kind of package or plan, among others. I won't go through all of them. What I really wanted to focus on is the same report found some 6 key areas that should really be the focus of any green and just recovery plan at any level. So 2 are focused on buildings and energy. 1 is building retrofits, so improving the efficiency of the existing building stock in our cities would create perhaps the most number of jobs out of all the options. And this is also in line with other scientific papers that show that buildings and energy are the greatest source of emissions currently from cities. If we look at it globally, perhaps some regions have different data, but globally, out of these almost 100 mega cities in the world, buildings and energy are the key or the most emitting source of greenhouse gas emissions. The second one, so this would look at efficiency, in other words, at the demand of energy that we have in our buildings, offices, schools, hospitals, etc. The second one was really focused on supply, so investing in renewable energy. So we have great examples in Brazil, for example. We have just reached yesterday 7 gigawatts of solar energy installed, both centralized and distributed in the country. And this is actually the result of incentives that were put forth by the national government, and we're now bearing fruit. And we should continue and look at other kinds of incentives, because we also know that $1 million invested in renewable energy, and it changes a bit from solar to wind to geothermal to biofuels, but they all generate more jobs per million or per dollar invested than investments in fossil fuels. So looking at equity, looking at the urgency of creating jobs, investing in renewable energy is more efficient and makes more sense. The other area is nature-based solutions, which is basically bringing nature back to our cities. So we've heard for the past few years also how important it is in terms of ecosystem services, co-benefits, but also for a recovery, it would improve the air quality in our cities, which we now have sufficient evidence to know that it's linked also to the pandemic. So the areas of the world that had more polluted air also were areas where the COVID-19 mortality rates were higher. So investing in nature-based solutions means you're bringing all the ecosystem services to the city. This includes cleaning up the air, decreasing the temperature, actually soaking CO2 out of the atmosphere, regenerating biodiversity in our urban areas, among others. The other one is circular economy. So really trying to make what we now call waste into resources. So really making sure that we are able to recover, reuse, and not just churn out the levels of waste that we're doing right now. And finally, the last two are sustainable transport. And that includes both active mobility, which is walking and cycling, creating the infrastructure. And in this, we also saw cities lead. So cities like Milan, that had a plan now to close a huge part of the downtown area for cyclists and pedestrians. And in fact, this won't be temporary. This will stay after the crisis. In Bogota, in just a couple of weeks, 90 kilometers of cycle lanes were implemented in the city, followed by dozens of other cities that took similar action. And finally, low carbon infrastructure. This is particularly relevant for the post-COVID recovery period, which a lot of our regions, I guess the whole world, maybe with the exception of some specific countries, are not there yet, unfortunately, but we will be, and we have to be prepared and understand that this low carbon clean infrastructure, also with the lock-in effect, is crucial. So if we have to invest in clean infrastructure, which is a classic way for public investments to heat the economy, it should be low carbon, clean infrastructure, because this will dictate how we use this infrastructure for the next decade, sometimes 50, 60 years. And then finally, the second report that we released, which is making case for this green and just recovery, brought some very interesting data, but also some concerning numbers. So examining all of the recovery funds currently available in the world, it was found that only 3 to 5% of the estimated 12 to $15 trillion that have been either committed or already diverted to the recovery process, only 3 to 5% are actually green. This means that most of our recovery is actually focusing on a business as usual scenario. So high emitting fossil fuel based packages of recovery. And this is very concerning, and we still have time to change that. We found that a quick green recovery could also generate more jobs, could generate, in fact, over 50 million jobs across the world, and green and decent jobs, because we know that many of the jobs that are created in a business as usual scenario are not necessarily decent, well, let alone green. And finally, also, it would be able to, in fact, decrease about 30% of the air pollution in our cities, just by taking these actions, focusing on clean transport, which I forgot to mention. So, of course, active mobility, but also cleaner technologies. So Latin America, for example, was leading after China. It was the region with the largest electric bus fleets in the world. And we should actually not stop this, but in fact accelerate this pattern of investing in clean transport and clean infrastructure, because this has the potential to also solve the air quality crisis, which kills over 8 million people a year. So again, bringing the equity lens, a common solution to both crises, and it all goes through the cities. So we really urge national governments. Now we saw also in the G20 meeting, there was no real consensus on debt release or debt renegotiation with developing countries, which is also crucial at the international level, but also at the national level. National governments, multilateral or national development banks, and the private sector really have to look and prioritize these areas and work with the cities to make sure that we use this opportunity to really tackle both crises at once. This is a unique moment in our lifetimes for many bad reasons, and this is the chance to make it also better for our future. So thank you. Saul, back to you.
Fantastic. Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but let's go back to Sara so we can hear what we were excited to hear and then got cut off. Sorry about that, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm only in video calls every day when the internet usually works, but yeah, now I hope it will work for the remainder of the time. Yeah, so as I started, so I'm active in the Swedish youth organization Push Sweden. We're active on the national level, but since the last 5 years also on international level. So for example, I have participated at some of the UNFCCC climate conferences, and there we meet the Swedish delegation and meet other young people from all over the world and try to push for higher climate ambitions. And then both there was more interest on the EU level, and also now, since the climate conferences have been postponed due to Corona to next year, we have also focused from this year on more on the politics on a European level. So we organized an event this year in May about the European Green Deal. And to that, we invited a Swedish member of parliament and the EU commissioner from the DG, from the area of climate. And it was very successful. And yeah, we had it digitally, of course, due to COVID reasons. But it was a whole afternoon, and we could really have like dialogues, and we kind of made these politicians and decision makers to listen to us. And we also submitted a letter afterwards to several member of parliament, both on EU level and in Sweden, with like our opinions about the European Green Deal and so on. And we have also made, and so the EU has also public consultations. So we have also submitted a response to the questionnaire or the public consultation on the 2030 climate target for the EU, and also about the European Climate Pact. So European Climate Pact is, in short, an initiative to involve all kinds of stakeholders. So young people, NGOs, industry, other organizations, and so to engage on climate, and you can set like a target or for yourself, and yeah, to say like I promise to do this kind of. So what we said about the EU climate targets, or we want to have higher ambitions earlier, or the current ambition level is far too low, and their new suggestions are about 50 or 55%. But to be in line with the science and 1.5 degree targets, we need to have at least 65% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And if I'm not wrong, it's from 1990 is the baseline, and then to 2030 is the target year. But I mean, if EU should think that, I mean, considering that EU should be really at the forefront and to leave space for other developing countries to maybe even increase their emissions to develop, so with regards to climate justice, and that EU has historically emitted much more emissions, the EU should, I mean, we say from the youth and climate movement that EU should have a target of like 70% even. But yeah, officially we maybe push for a 65% reduction in emissions to 2030. Secondly, regarding this target, we also push for having like emissions targets, so to have a target which covering the emissions and not including removals, like not to have a net target, because that would be less ambitious. So we want the target to be as ambitious as possible. And third, we also think that the target should be consumption-based, so include emissions which we cause in other countries when we produce our products which have been imported to the EU. Emissions are caused elsewhere, and we say that this should be brought into the target, or the scope of the emissions for the target. And yeah, I want to kind of finish off that it's still possible to engage. I mean, if you live in the EU, then find an organization close to you which is engaging on this. If not in your country, then there are organizations on the European level. There's, for example, the coordination body kind of, which is close to the EU politics, is called CAN Europe, like Climate Action Network Europe. And they will actually have a strategy call tomorrow to discuss the strategy, how we can push for this higher ambition for the targets. Because already on the 10th to 11th of December, there will be a high-level meeting in Europe about this emission target. So we can still influence this, And but apart from these targets, you can also influence other parts of the European Green Deal because it consists of a lot of different packages and strategies. Otherwise, if you're in Europe, there are also other organizations such as Youth and Environment Europe, YEE, or Generation Climate Europe. And there's even an initiative which we collaborated with, or I kind of co-founded, I don't know, a Green Deal for Youth, where we really want to have young people involved in the Green Deal, both to develop the Green Deal and to implement it. So yeah. So, but if you're outside of Europe, there's maybe a Green Deal there. Yeah, we have heard US and Brazil maybe have some examples. So yeah, there's always a possibility to engage for higher climate ambitions. And really, we young people are really needed to push and follow up yeah, for higher climate ambitions. Thank you.
Fantastic. Glad someone's pushing for more, right? Cool. Well, maybe we can certainly open it up to questions. And what I'll add here on my end is that one of the things we're working on in the United States and sort of pushing the climate movement forward is trying to combine public investments with keeping it in the ground. And what does that actually look like? Because we hear a lot of folks talk about climate action in different ways. And then when it comes to, okay, like we need to stop pulling coal out of the ground, it gets to be really tricky. Like suddenly some of the people who were in the room disappeared who said they wanted to get involved. And it's sort of that, supply side, as people call it, piece to add to rewarding successful strategies. So Sara, maybe you could go first, but I'm curious how your advocacy, what your focus has been, or how you think this sort of keep it in the ground supply side, thinking about actually just stopping some of the violent things we're doing to the earth from happening from that perspective.
Yeah, sure. I've actually been involved in the campaign called Fossil Free, which is a divestment campaign. So it's part of the organization 350.org. So I was active there for like 2 years when I studied. So we wanted our university, Ilan University, to move away, like to divest from fossil fuels. So to take away investments in fossil area and put them in preferably like climate, things which are good for climate instead. So that's definitely a way to do it. I don't know the latest status of exactly that campaign, but I'm sure it's running like still in different places all over the world. Like the fossil free campaign has really spread all over the world. And also as part of when the Pope came to Sweden, we kind of urged the Pope to divest from fossil fuels as well. So that's also a possibility. So to channel your money away from fossil fuels, and that's a way to keep it in the ground. Otherwise, there's also these concrete actions. For example, in Germany, this is called Ende Gelände, which is to basically occupy a mine or go to a mine. I actually participated in one action one time, and it's really impressive. Like, I mean, concretely, you kind of make them actually stop their actions. Or they're digging for coal for maybe some hours or a day. I mean, that's not what counts, but it's the attention around it and to make the statement. So yeah, those are 2 examples which I can share at least to keep it in the ground.
Fantastic. And I'm wondering, Joaquim, if you'd be interested in chiming in as well, on this question here of, keep it in the ground, and how do you think of this from a finance perspective? How does this sort of fit in to the work that you've done at the federal and international level in terms of, supply side, the bad stuff and where it comes from? So really appreciate.
Well, I think there is a lot of scope. Like I said, the public investment, the private investment, they're complementary. And the examples that I gave, for instance, if you could set up a market for, say, green certificates, the same way that today, for instance, we already have some green bonds that pay differently if you achieve certain, say, objectives. So, for instance, a company will issue a bond. We have seen that in Brazil, issue a bond, and there you have a lower interest rate as long as they, say, reach certain goals. And if they don't reach those goals, then they have to pay a penalty, which would mean a higher, say, interest rate. So there are more and more options in the financial markets to help companies to finance change their transformation, and also making choices that are better for the environment. I believe that if you can get to a market for, say, carbon credit, with all the due diligence, all the right measurements, and being sure that they are integral to the objectives, the global objectives, as well as the national objectives, I think this could help a lot the different countries to make a greater progress. So I think when I think about what people can do, really get involved in this finance and bringing new imaginative ways to finance initiatives that can be really large, like $1 billion bonds, but also can be small. Really, that's the way to go, and it can involve people of all ages and walking of life.
Fantastic. Yeah, this is a very aspirational vision that you're laying out here. It's so I think that's fantastic. And you know what? I mean, yeah, what can a kid do? I mean, you're someone who's been very involved at every level. And I'm wondering, how do you people see you and say, this is a very distinguished person with a lot of background knowledge on this issue. What would you say to people who are just getting involved as sort of a word of inspiration?
Well, I don't know. Look, I think we cannot really tell people what to do. That's something that I've learned. But I think there are opportunities, and there are plenty of, say, places, institutions that are looking for new ideas and ways to contribute. And I think what is important is that you have ways to contribute to the average scale. And it can be nature, it can be through social activities. I think, I mean, in the cities, there's so many things that can do. And then also, of course, there are individual options that can be helpful. I think that we financial institutions, we're learning and starting to have, say, special programs for young people that include more and more of, say, these sustainability aspects. And probably we could do more in terms of even developing special programs in terms of a green finance, because the Green Deal in many ways will need different ways of green finance together with green legislation. So just as a final example, in many cases we would have, for instance, a transition. One thing that is often talked is a so-called transition risk, which is when, say, the legislation and the landscape start to move, many companies and many activities all of a sudden become less productive. You have stranded assets, we have, say, fossil fuels activities that are not competitive and so on. And of course, there is the investor, but there are also the people who work in these activities. So to find ways where in the transition, you, for instance, suppose you move from a coal plant to a new sustainable plant that is actually more efficient. You would have a cheaper energy with the new technology. If you just give all the benefits to the consumer, what's going to happen to the people who are in the old industry? So finding ways to split that through regulation and then through financial mechanisms can be very important to facilitate this transition, protecting people that will maybe be dislocated. So you're creating good new jobs, and the same way, at the same time, you were protecting and giving some sort of a bridge for those who were involved sometimes for a lifetime in an industry that is now, say, inadequate given the challenge of climate change.
Fantastic. Okay, we have a question here, which is about the politicization of Green Deals, Green New Deals in the United States, and, you know, especially U.S. centric, right? We're big into that kind of stuff over here. And what are some of the strategies for overcoming these sticking points? And I'm gonna quickly comment on that, and then maybe we can bring in Helena and Ilan to have the final word as we're closing out our time here. So what I'll say about the Green New Deals as a, you know, politicization is that, you know, before the Green New Deal, people were sort of stuck at, you know, a carbon tax will be a good thing, and, you know, having trouble coming up with other ideas. And what we've seen in the United States was actually, although the Green New Deal was politicized, after its introduction, it gives space to some Republicans and more conservative voices who had been denying climate change to now be supporting maybe a smaller carbon tax, but it actually sort of moved the Overton window to create opportunities for other people by, you know, having a more progressive climate solution such as the Green New Deal. So final 2 or 3 minutes remaining. This will be my last word. I really enjoyed being here, and I'd love to hear the final comments from Ilan and Helena. Why don't we go with Helena first? You were talking about public investment. Maybe you could speak to some of the things that Joaquim and I were talking about, you know, different market solutions and keeping it in the ground, and how public investment turns into that. And then we'll have the final word from Ilan. Thank you, Helena.
Thank you. Well, I would like just to say that we had one global pandemic, but the pandemics are not over. And the pandemics are not over until we decide that we have to prevent the disruption of nature. And before nature-based solutions, we have to keep nature and safeguard nature. And one of the big lessons of this pandemic situation is the disruption between the human communities and forests and the nature and biodiversity. So we do have to come up with a strong narrative that puts together, you know, the biodiversity crisis and the climate change crisis, because we won't solve one without the other. They have to go together. And this is one of the most powerful changes that we have to learn and we have to implement. This is not easy. It is one of the problems of this crisis is that this is very complex, and we have to bring a lot of players together, and those players are not used to work together, and this is another issue. So when we call for policies, and I would like to go into your question, we do need strong policies, and without strong public policies, we will never pave the way for private entities to come and join us, like the financing sector, the banking sector, the insurance sector. And they are changing because they are realizing that they have to change. So everybody, the perception that the change is somehow imposed by the conditions of the planet are so striking that we cannot avoid it anymore. It's there, and the change has to become a fact. And so we need strong public policies and strong leaderships. And sometimes in policy we have a momentum. And fortunately, we have a very strong narrative in Europe nowadays. The Green Deal is part of this strong policy that is really supporting a change. The change that the general perception is that the change has to be done, because the planet cannot sustain anymore the kind of path that we've been into over the last decades. So we do have to change. And we won't change without strong public policies, leadership that really paves the way for the private sector to come and join, And then, of course, we will need these strong regulations, as it was already said, regulations connected to the trading system, regulations connected to the financing system, the financing sector. Obviously, we will need all of them. But first of all, we need strong public policies that have to be supported by citizens. And these citizens have to engage, have to commit. They have to realize that the change is needed more than ever. We have 1 decade to change. This is a critical decade. So we have to commit, and we have to support our good governments, those that have the common good agenda. Those are the governments that we have to support. And this is time for it. And just as a final mark, to say that I'm very happy to be nowadays an European citizen, because I'm a world citizen. Being an European citizen, I'm a world citizen. And that's great these times that we are living in Europe. So we want very much to influence the world to change with us, because there's no other way to go. And that's the reason why I really need that we have a momentum. Fortunately, the US now is coming and joining the climate change international policy, the multilateral approach for global policy, and this is fantastic. So let's just take the chance and go for the green deals, because they are part of the good narrative. This is the public good agenda, the common good agenda. So we have to support it, and of course with a lot of flaws, and that we have to correct, to change, and to. But this is our role as citizens, as our Sara was saying. We have to be more and more committed in every sense. All the means we have, all the tools we have to help the transition, because there's no other way. There's no planet B.
Thank you so much, Helena, and all the panelists. That was very informative, and it was good to see that we have people with different ages and former jobs doing the same for our planet. We are going to continue from now with a panel about the role of Amazon and the indigenous communities. And we have several panels also in Portuguese and side events. So I invite you to go to our website and see what's the next panel you want to watch. And if you missed because of your time zone, you can watch the past panels as well. And this one is going to be recorded, so you can share with your friends. Thank you so much, everyone.